Hi, I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is the Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do.
Hi, we'd like to welcome you again to the Innkeepers podcast. Today, we're talking about preparing to work in hard places. And when we say that, what we mean is that places where religion, language learning, climate, and the politics can make it especially hard to be a global worker.
Yeah, so today we have the opportunity to interview Sam and Jim, who have both worked extensively in hard places. So Sam lived in 2 countries in the Middle East for 11 years with his wife and 2 children, and he worked in business and NGO projects while sharing his faith and helping Muslims follow Jesus. For the last 4 to 5 years, he's been working alongside churches to assess and prepare long-term teams to go to unreached and unengaged places in the Muslim world. So that's a bit about Sam's experience. And then Jim and his family spent 10 years in the mission field, first in civil-war-Uganda in the 80s, and they saw God start disciple-making movements among their people group. Then after some graduate studies, they took a team from their church to live and minister in a 99.7 Muslim country in Central Asia. And he and his wife currently work to recruit and prepare workers who will creatively go to pioneering environments to be ambassadors for Christ and make disciples. So those are some of gives you an idea of these men have a rich experience in helping people and going themselves to these kinds of hard places.
Okay. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Hi, this is Steve with the Innkeepers podcast, and today we'd like to welcome Jim and Sam, and we're gonna have a conversation with them about preparing global workers to work in hard places.
Yeah, so Jim and Sam, thank you so much for being with us today. And could you just share a little bit about your work experience and what it has been like in preparing global workers?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'll start. Thanks so much for the privilege of being on the podcast today. We have a joy of working with an organization that does focus on hard places in the world, and the Lord is raising up workers to go to these places. One of the things we do take very seriously is preparation for these, and each of us who work from the sending base have our role. Parts of our role in the preparation of these workers before they head to the field. So I work in mobilization, and my particular part of coaching that helps prepare these guys to go overseas is to introduce them to locals who work or who are living here as international students or as refugees or migrants of some sort, and to begin having the conversations about faith and about life, and sometimes politics comes into play, and disparities in economics and all kinds of things that are uncomfortable for Americans to deal with. And then beyond those, then as a mobilizing coach, I get a chance to help the workers as they are thinking through what life would look like on the field, to be thinking through what might a theology of suffering look like? What special needs do I have for my children, or what kinds of persecution or emotional issues will I face? And these are the kinds of things that some people will face here in the States, but definitely people who cross cultures, especially into hard places, will. will suffer from these things. So I guess I'm at the beginning of the pipeline, if you want to call it that, and have some beginning, I don't know, intention to make help workers start to think through these things.
Great, thanks.
Hmm.
Sam?
Yeah, it's a great honor to be here with you guys today. So I'm kind of the next step in preparation, in preparing people to go to the field. Myself, we spent about 11 years in the Middle East. So we is my wife and 2 kids. And I think partly why I'm really passionate about what I do is I think we were pretty well prepared after going through an internship and just getting good kind of cultural adaptation training, a lot of these things that Tim is talking about, people speaking into our lives and being aware of the things that we needed to grow in before we departed, and then just facing a lot of trials while we were overseas, a lot of different varied trials, from sickness, family deaths, team breakups, kind of just unrest in places we were living, facing issues with our kids, all sorts of things like that. Just really, I think, prepared me to maybe gently and like in an understanding way be able to address things in people's lives and say, hey, this, you're going to need to work on this, but also in a direct way, kind of a direct and loving approach. And yeah, I think people come to us, they really want to, they really want to make a difference. And at the same time, they really appreciate kind of our process that we put them through. And as we just kind of really lovingly, say, hey, we want you to be there for a long time. Kind of the hard places are like they're unreached for a reason. And a lot of that is because it's a hard place, and people need to be really resilient in order to handle that.
So either Jim or Sam, as we move on here, maybe we should just take a second and kind of paint a picture of a quote unquote hard place. And I'm just going to say, generally speaking, my understanding, it's a place where someone has to keep a lower profile about certain things, and their presence in the country is it's just they're not there to be noticed, right? And so on. But if you guys could just comment a little bit about when people go into these certain different places, kind of what they are expecting to encounter.
Yeah, especially as I was thinking about this, there's difficulty on different levels. It could be, somebody could be out in the middle of a desert somewhere in a refugee camp or something, and that has its own hardship. I kind of feel like one of the hardest things that people face is just adapting to that new culture, and it's kind of like it doesn't matter how hard you try to not stick out, you still stick out, and sometimes that's a good thing, and it means people come to you, but then it also means that they're always knocking on your door, and you have no space for your personal life. I mean, it's just a radically different culture in so many different ways. And then at the same time, there's this deep desire to make a difference. And maybe people misunderstanding you, you not being able to speak the language well, you're offending people because you don't know the culture. I feel like some of those things oftentimes are even more difficult than the kind of geographical location, or maybe the physical environment. Because a lot of times they hit really deeply at kind of the core desires that people have. Like, I want to make a difference, and like nobody even wants to hear what I have to say about my faith, So I I don't know, Jim might disagree with me on that, but that's something that I feel like people really need to be able to be ready to face. So,
I would just include that oftentimes the places that are really hard are places that um, maybe spiritual warfare is a
yeah.
very in your face kind of environment. Um, my wife and I were in the middle of a civil war in East Africa back in the 80s. Had our kids there. There was a lot going on, both physically, emotionally, politically in the country, but spiritually, it was just a very difficult place to be. There was a pervading kind of darkness, and I mean, as much as there was life coming in new disciples and churches planted, but uh, there was a lot of suffering going on around us, disease and war, having friends murdered, things like this was just, oh, it just tears people apart,
Hmm.
tears
Hmm.
workers apart who are not from that place.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and what would you say some of the themes are that people who are going to work in hard places are encountering? I mean, I think of poverty and suffering, and I mean, what would you add to that list?
Yeah, I think definitely those seeing that on a day to day basis, constantly having that in your face. Um, I think learning to like figuring out what you're going to do in the country. Oftentimes, a lot of these places people have to um, change visas. They have to constantly figure out new ways to be able to stay long term. So dealing with the bureaucracy of a new place is very draining. Um, yeah, I'm just kind of thinking of a couple more things. So go ahead, Jim, if you have things
Yeah,
on
I'd
top of
say
your mind.
some other themes, certainly in the environment around us, but in our own families, uh, watching uh, sometimes watching our marriages really stress and strain under these unspoken or unmet expectations. Seeing our kids sometimes, to see your little one get malaria, or to know you have to deworm them every uh, every year with a broad spectrum wormer, and this stuff comes out of their diapers, and you're going, oh, what have I done to my children? There's just all of this kind of stuff that not just what's around us, but what's going on in our families and our marriages as well. These are like you said rightly, Kara. There are broad themes, and each field is going to have different details related to that. But for the most part, oh, it's uh, it's it's whatever it is that is discouraging us and causing us to skip our devotions and our time of abiding with Christ, and times of skipping going, being there for our spouses and our children.
Hmm.
um, these lend to the hard things that we have to work through, yeah, independent of where on a map.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, there
I
are
think
things.
another big thing is would be loneliness.
Mhm.
Um, we leave. Usually, somebody is going to leave a solid community of faith wherever they're coming from, um, and they might be on a team, they might not be, but oftentimes when people are on a team, like it changes.
Mhm.
Somebody has to leave. Things are constantly shifting, and it's much more difficult to have really close, deep face-to-face relationships, and you have to be much more intentional to really share what's going on deep down. I think that really lends um, to people feeling like really facing loneliness in a way that they never have before.
Mm, mm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. I've heard many stories of that isolation as I've done debriefing with our guests here. Um, that sense of, feeling so detached from everyone and
Mm-hmm.
everything else. And you kind of start wondering if if it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with the families with kids, let's think about the kids for a minute. What is life like for them? What kinds of things are concerns? What kinds of things do they have to be careful about? What are some of the challenges especially that the kids in these families face?
I'll start with, we had kids, we had them on the field. And so we had young ones and toddlers, and then we were home for a long time and then took teenagers back to Central Asia when we went again. And so I think we've experienced some of uh, the spectrum of the kinds of things that kids go through at various ages. But one thing that I I think parents in general are maybe, and excuse me, I know you can never generalize about parenting. You can never generalize about children ever, even within the same family. But what I have seen many times on the field, and that is that I think parents' protection of your children, of course, is important, but so much so that they sometimes obsess over the let's say the future success of their children, that they obsess over the the physical care for the child to the point of really building a bubble around them so that they can never ever become friends with locals. They can never, be around where they're learning language. And um, yeah, I think some of the suffering that our children go through is watching their parents suffer over trying to protect them or be super restrictive or something like that. And again, families are different from one to the next, so I don't want to generalize, but I do want to say that there is something about uh, giving our children to the Lord, even in difficult places.
Hmm.
I love that. And there's a lot of amazing resources, books, things out there about third culture kids that people really need to, think through the ages of their children when they're transitioning overseas, what it looks like for a young, usually families are going over with their kids at a really young age, and they adapt and take on the culture differently than adults do, and they kind of that's why they're called third culture kids, because um, they become a different mix of the culture and their passport culture than we do as adults. Um, and I think it's really, really important for parents to be aware of that change. And like Jim is saying, you know, really allowing their kids to engage in the local culture, um, and inviting their children into what they're doing in ministry. I think sometimes there can be a little bit of a dichotomy of like, here's this, we have this mission over here and we have our family stuff over here, but finding ways to merge those so that the children really feel like they're a part of, what God's doing, and they're not just like, hey, we're MKs, but they really feel like, they're a part of it. It's fun to see. It doesn't always happen that way, but it's fun to see when that happens.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, again, coming back to kids, I wouldn't kind of romanticize this that we're saying here. There are hard things that the kids go through. The transient nature, watching their friends leave if they have an expatriate community. Wow, the first time that happened, it was like, I knew it for myself to prepare for it. I didn't think to prepare my kids for having all of their friends go away and not come back. But the other thing, don't romanticize about the local culture is that, yeah, the kids pick up stuff from walking around barefooted, and they get sores on their legs, and they get these nasty oozing things, or the as I said to my teenage sons looking out the window, hey, there's some teenage boys down there at the park. Go down and see if you can't chat with them or learn some Russian from them or whatever. And, they came up a few minutes later. I said, what happened? He said, well, they were watching porn on their phones, and I don't think that's what you wanted us to do, was it, Dad? And okay, thank you. Thank you for being wise, for
Hmm.
uh, uh, yeah, for knowing what was good about the culture and what wasn't good.
Yeah.
There are some unique challenges, and I think you guys speak well to that. And you can't protect them from everything, but you also have to. It takes wisdom and discernment.
And
Mhm.
practice.
Yeah, yeah, and you will fail as a parent. So
Say that again.
and there's grace.
Yes,
And
we did.
I
Yes, we do.
yes. So, what are some of the realities that workers are unprepared to deal with in these hard places that perhaps we need to be a little more aware of?
I've got such a long list, Kara. But I'll try and
Well, give me what you got.
pare it down. One thing that I was not prepared for, and thinking again, just about my own experience, one thing I wasn't prepared for was the out of sight, out of mind reality of the church back home. I thought people would be praying for us and would be ready to get on Skype in those days and talking to us, but their schedules are busy and they've got their own stuff going on. And yeah, you're out here. That was a reality of just the nature of life. When you leave a place, most people, other than your mom and your grandma, will forget. Will forget where you are. Another thing that I wasn't prepared for, even though I had been told, learn the language well, spend a lot of time with locals, and you'll just be one of the boys or whatever. Wow, you're never going to fit in. That's just how it goes. As Scott rightfully said, you're going to stand out, whether it's the accent you have or your clothes or how you smell, or certainly, in certain places, the color of your skin, but you're never going to quite fit in. I wasn't ready for the stress of team. And I know, I'm sure you probably talk about this all the time, but I think our organization has really done a tremendous job in recent years about preparing people to make peace, pursuing biblical peace within teams, and it has cut the reasons that people for attrition rates. It's cut that one about not getting along with team members way back. It's now like the fifth or sixth reason people come back, and not the first. And so wasn't really ready for the stress of teams. And I think finally, just we talk about a theology of suffering, but we don't often talk about a theology of the grind, which is just continuing on and keep going in the face of whether it's opposition or disinterest or whatever it is. God has something in that, both for us and for them. He's doing his work, whether we see it or not. And so the theology of the grind is getting us, or helping us prepare to be prepared. It's going to take some time. Don't. Yeah, I've got all kinds of things to say about that. But Sam, what do you think?
That's a great one. I didn't name it that, but I'm going to steal your title. I think one big thing I was thinking of, just that long. People aren't always thinking through the really long term, and they might say, "Yeah, we're going to be there 5, 10 years," but when something doesn't happen and they don't see somebody come to faith in the first 2 years, it's like, "Oh, am I really called here?" So kind of, I think sometimes people are unprepared for how they'll respond to a lack of fruit, and for things not going the way that they expected them to go. Um, for a few 3-4 years, life was wonderful for me, and I was studying Arabic. And then when it was to the point where it was much easier to flow in the culture, and still learning and everything, of course. But when I was kind of when those things were easy and I was seeing no fruit, it was like, oh man, something's really wrong with me. That began to like really hit at deeper areas of my soul, and I think everyone's going to go through that. I think when they go through different phases of culture shock, but is doing as much of that sort of preparation beforehand is really important. The other thing I hinted at a little bit ago is just the cultural, being prepared to adapt to a new culture, understanding worldview, being culturally intelligent, being able to kind of suspend your biases about things and not come to conclusions about why something works the way it does. It will help maybe kind of ease the pain of culture shock at times, but I think that's a huge area that we don't always tend to dig in deeply enough to. So.
Well, your organization obviously works alongside men and women from other organizations in the same countries. What happens when you realize someone has showed up and no one has really clued them in about what life is going to be like? Someone shows up really pretty unprepared. What is that like?
Oof.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can lead to really deeply questioning their calling. Even, a theology of, I've even, heard some people say some really sad things about what they think God thinks of them and what God has actually called them to. Just that kind of that naivety can lead to, this, everything's going to be great. Yeah, it'll be kind of hard, but we'll get through it. Kind of like just brushing aside the truth of how hard it's going to be. You can never obviously know, you can never fully know what it's going to be like, but I remember lots of times where when we were in the middle of trials, it was like, okay, the pain, like this, the fact that somebody told us didn't make it really this situation easier necessarily, but at least I can say, wow, somebody told me, okay, I'm not alone. Lots of other people are facing these sorts of things. They got through it. How can I enter into it? And so otherwise, when you're not ready for that, there's a much greater likelihood that people are going to, face really heavy emotional, maybe mental burnout, sin easily, your old patterns come back. Maybe they were a kitten before you left and now they're a roaring lion, so that's a common experience for people.
Steve, were you asking if maybe some folks who felt like they got a good preparation to go somewhere see people from maybe another org, or they've just come by themselves and they're not really prepared? Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, someone who shows up not really understanding where they are and what life is going to be like, and how they just probably struggle in a really deep way.
Yeah. I think there's a number of different responses for that based on the individual who shows up unprepared. There needs to be there might be a humility. If there's a lack of humility, it could well be that it's you throw up your hands and do what you can to. I'm sorry to say this, but sometimes there are folks who showed up in places where we had to, or not had to, said, you're on your own.
Mhm.
we don't really want to associate because what you're doing could get us, if we're associated with you, it could get us
Yeah.
into trouble.
Right.
But I really think that somebody who is in the States and you see somebody in need, you see a brother or sister in need, if you're the kind who will go and put your arm around them and maybe correct them, that's going to happen on the field as well.
Hmm.
If you're one that's just so focused on your work that everybody else get out of the way, that's going to happen on the field too. But I don't ever want to feel like I'm so well prepared that I I don't I can't listen to what somebody else has to say. I want to have the humility to go, yeah, things work differently in our org, but you guys might have something, something going on. I have learned these kinds of things, maybe to not be so safety or security conscious. I learned this from other people who are like standing on the street corners and handing out things, and oh, you didn't get kicked out right away. Maybe there's some fruit there. I don't have to feel like my own experience is normative for everybody else. That's I think that's a part of maturing really as a worker, is that we don't have to feel like what we have done or experienced is the way it needs to be done and experienced.
Mhm.
So we've been talking a lot about how what are the struggles and maybe what are the challenges when you're not prepared or the things that you don't expect. What can we do to prepare and that can be building resilience and helping workers and their families to actually succeed long term? And I will use the word succeed, knowing that it doesn't, I'm not talking about, you
Yes.
have to,
Yeah.
the standards
Yes.
of you
Yeah.
have to have 1 million people or that come to Christ,
Mhm.
but just this, that are able to stay for the long haul.
Something we always focus on is people, helping people have a deep understanding of their identity in Christ, first and foremost. Not an identity of uh, succeeding as far as numbers and um, changing the world and performing and being able to report the big fun happy things in the first few years, and like we were talking about earlier, just a really, and this is something that the church can do, that people need to do on their own, but as we were talking about before, to have that really good deep solid understanding of what suffering is for and what the Bible says about it in so many places, what it does for us, how the Holy Spirit uses it in our lives, um, that we can rejoice in suffering, all these things, that Father uses suffering for to really transform us.
Mm.
So that when we hit it, we don't go, oh, it must be spiritual warfare. Okay, well, maybe it is. But what does the Lord want to teach you through it still?
Yeah. Yeah.
And be able to enter into it. Those are a couple of big things that come to mind.
The questions that you sent us, talk about what are some things that the churches can do, what are some things that agencies can do, what are some things that individuals can do to be prepared. And it feels to me that, and not knowing every church or every city or every place, it feels to me that the North American church is generally bad at developing theology of suffering. I think the North American church is generally bad at humility. There's so much arrogance that we as if we don't have things to learn from other cultures, as if we don't have things to learn from the way other cultures internalize the gospel and and the behaviors that come out of that are culturally appropriate that might never cross our mind. I think developing a spirit of humility, which is Christ-likeness, of course, begging God to make us more like Jesus. These are the things that we can practice here before going to the field. There's so much of a sense of, I mean, workers of the gospel are just, they're cowboys anyway. They're gonna do things that people don't normally do. And so we do develop this bravado and this pride that we're going to a hard place, and watch out, because we're coming with our version of what the gospel looks like in our church. And so get ready. Yeah. John 20:21, Jesus tells his disciples, peace. I'm just giving you peace, guys. As the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you. And to just unpack all of that, Lord, how did the Father send you? How can I emulate the way that you're sending me, us, our family? And I think humility is a big, big part of the character of Christ and a character of his disciples.
So
I was thinking about how,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Just a quick kind of anecdote. Thinking about how often we're like maybe mobilized by reading some famous missionary stories, which are great and they're fun to read, but then realizing there's probably not going to be a book written about me, and that's actually probably a really good thing, But just being like realizing people might not remember my name, but if they remember the fullness of the gospel somehow, some way through my life, or something that I was involved in, that's really what we want to see.
Could I address agencies a little bit?
Yeah,
please.
That's a great step.
Again, my experience isn't normative, so let's start there. But I have been in this, I'm going to call it the mission enterprise, for long enough that I've gotten to see a bunch from the inside. I've gotten to see bunches of organizational strengths and weaknesses, and I feel like those people who maybe are going to places where the church already exists and there's numbers of believers already in place, people maybe going, to serve a particular church, that there are some check boxes, some hoops that people can jump through to prepare them to go to the field. When you're going into pioneering settings, one worker I know said, going to the field is like pouring Miracle Grow on your sin. It just jumps up and gets way bigger than you thought it should be. But there it is. It's something left undone. And I'd say agencies who are sending to the hard places, to the really hard places, are the ones who have learned over time to I'm just going to skip the check boxes, and we're going to talk specifics here. We're going to talk about you and your marriage. We're going to talk about you and your walk with Christ. We're going to talk about you and this particular weakness that you have. And so I think sending to the pioneering world requires coaches maybe who have seen the battle up close, who have scars actually to show for that battle, and can then customize based on individual needs. I think it's really important for stuff like you guys at Sanctuary Inn to be in close contact with people, loving them, hearing their stories, and being able to speak directly into their lives, as opposed to reading a book or taking a class and raising support and then go.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways that agencies are preparing their people better these days by leaving check boxes behind.
Mm. Yeah,
Good.
rather than having them say, "Well, rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10," and okay, that's good. Now let's move on. Realizing that there is no, people talk about the sanctification that happens once you get on that plane and cross the ocean or wherever, and it's just like, it's
Mhm.
like it's some magical belief that it's like, I'm going to be a changed person when I land. And no,
Yeah.
you're going to be the same person, but you're going to be exhausted and hot and tired. And it's not going to get any better. So
For
anyway,
sure.
Yeah.
so yeah, just being diligent. I appreciate your words you shared about the agencies really kind of pushing on the things that need to be pushed on to make sure that that couple, family, single is a strong, healthy person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
One thing that's really, oh, go ahead, Kara.
yeah, the reality is you can be a really strong, healthy person and have even been coached well, and it can still be extremely
Yeah.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think that's where the theology of suffering and, theology of the grind, as you said, like
Yeah.
that is to have realistic expectations, I think is a lot of
Yeah.
what I'm hearing too.
Yeah.
Be
Mhm.
prepared, but also realize you are being called to something that is hard, and that is not
Yeah.
make it not good.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an issue of, oh, this is a bad situation, or I'm a bad person, or things are going badly for me. I'm in a hard situation, and it doesn't change who I am as a person.
That's right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam,
Having a firm hold on that identity that Sam talked about earlier is really important for us. I
Yeah.
would I would say that for those maybe who are listening, that unmet expectations are the cause of conflict, right? That's to ask all the good questions, to try and avoid conflict on your team or to conflict with your national partners, to ask gentle, humble questions, to ask those what I call dumb, smart questions, is you ask the same question to a bunch of different people, and then you start to get an idea of what the real answer is in those things. But you're asking good questions, you're doing your homework, you're preparing both internally and externally, and make disciples while you're here. Learn how to fail at that, and learn how to learn how to sit back and watch the Holy Spirit work in people's lives despite your best efforts or your mistakes. Yes. And yeah, being self-feeding. I think there is a distinct, and this is a cultural issue, there's a distinct biblical illiteracy in Western culture these days. And making sure, and you can sign up for biblical literacy kinds of inventories and tests that you can do right online. I think this is important for us, even those who have been in the faith for a long time. We've got weaknesses. Take one or two of these things and build that up. Not that, oh man, I scored a 90%, I'm good to go, but that okay, I've got some grasp on scripture and church history and Old and New Testaments, but you need to it needs to be part of who you are. You need to be self-feeding. That's going to defeat a lot of the disappointment, a lot of the suffering, a lot of the hardness that's going to come. And of course, the more you read the Gospels, the more you try and emulate how Jesus answered questions and didn't answer questions. And yeah, I think that's how we're going to get over a lot of the unpreparedness is doing our homework, meaning asking a lot of questions in humility.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of touched on the whole idea of an individual taking the responsibility for themselves to be as, and we realize when we say words like whole or complete or healthy, we're just meaning it's a measure of something, and it's not a completeness or anything.
That's correct.
But
There's
so
no perfect.
there's no perfect missionary. There's no perfect person. So just I'm hearing you say things like just an accountability for yourself, for your spiritual well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being. So is some of that taught in when someone's training or preparing for something like this, or is it just something you look for in a person?
Yeah, we definitely look for it kind of in the assessment screening process. That's as a coach. If somebody is humble and teachable, it's an absolute joy. And it's really, you have much greater hope that they're going to do really, really well in the long term. And if they have that ability to really submit to us and as a team, it's not just me when I'm coaching somebody, it's like an entire team of people praying for this person and then also able to submit to their church and how their church is involved. One thing that's really fun about my role is that, like, I can point some things out in somebody's life. For example, maybe the church wasn't able to ask some of those questions for whatever reason, or sometimes somebody that wants to go to a hard place, the church just sees as like a hero. I mean, they're just on the pedestal. And so they don't always ask the right questions of people. So it's really amazing to be able to, as part of an agency, to be able to be in that place to ask the right questions and then partner with the church and say, hey, this person really needs to work on their emotional intelligence in these areas, for example. How are we going to do that together to make sure they're going to succeed? Because we don't have these people in person for very long. I'm in regular contact with them, but I don't see them face to face in a ministry context, in work, and when whatever their normal life is. But their church is, and they have the ability to do that. And so I think it's really important that more and more we see agencies and churches work really closely together to help prepare people.
Amen.
Partnerships can really go a long ways, and recognizing that we're all sending together. It's not the Lone Ranger model doesn't work, so we need to figure it out together. Well, as we wrap it up, we're wondering what are some resources or trainings or things that you would want to pass on to our listeners that might be considering or are in the process of preparing people, and they just don't know what resources to grab hold of. So if you could share those, that would be great.
Yeah, what do you have, Jim?
Well, I was just gonna say that kind of a famous place is MTI down in Colorado Springs. They do great stuff with, I think, just the mechanics of preparation, with team building and so on. I think that's a good spot. I have really enjoyed, I forget her name now. The author is it Sarah, somebody, about facing danger, facing risk? What is that book?
Yeah, Facing Danger. It's Anna Hampton.
Anna, not Sarah. Yeah, really enjoyed that as a as kind of a primer on preparing to go to hard places. The suffering comes, in a lot of different forms and a lot of different environments, and so that's a good broad spectrum book I've appreciated.
Yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there. I think it's always, maybe not always, but oftentimes helpful for somebody to do an internship. People can be really involved in their church, but often that's different from kind of pioneering work. So either an internship, a cross-cultural sort of internship like Launch Global. There's others out there.
Global
Frontier. Yeah, Global Frontier Mission. There's also more really good ones kind of in overseas that you can do. Or even just, a situation where you're doing ministry like in an inner city environment, or, with people, unchurched people that that's going to be more similar to what it's going to be like on the field.
Yeah.
Better to learn in kind of like training wheels. Learn where you can actually fail with support around you, rather than struggle and have, those sins that have their miracle grow on them out on your own. So that's what I'm hearing you talking about, is creating those environments where you can try this out and see if this really is what would a good fit for you.
Yeah, I've been listening a lot to another podcast. Can I mention the name on your podcast? Is that
sure?
I don't know if you do like a brand thing. But all the emotionally healthy resources Pete Scazzaro, that Pete Scazzaro has done are incredible. And just the kind of the assessment that Jim talked about, you can actually take and emotionally, it's free. You can take this assessment, and it basically tells you if you're an emotional infant or an emotional adolescent, or in all these different areas. It's it's a little maybe I did it by myself. That was much easier, I didn't realize I needed to talk to some people about a couple of things. But there's a lot of really awesome resources like that. A lot of times people struggle with struggles with healthy sexuality, addictions, maybe. There's also resources like one that comes to mind. It's called Sexual Behavior Self-Assessment. And there's another one that's similar to it that you can do. And it kind of just points out like, hey, here's some of your struggles. And maybe they're coming from such and such of a wounding. And, talk to a pastor or a counselor. They can just really give people direction for how to dig into some of the most common struggles, and find healing in those areas. So,
this is so good. The suffering and the hardship isn't just about being hard. It leads to other stuff that are coping mechanisms, whether good or inappropriate or even downright sinful. It's not just about being in a hard place. It's about our response, the workers' response to the hard things that are coming. And as I said earlier, it breaks up marriages and breaks up teams, and we really want to face these things before we go.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. It's really encouraging to know that work is being done on this, and that people are, in some organizations, really being intentional in the preparation so that we don't have the crash and burns and that really are so destructive.
Yeah.
For that person's life. I mean, we don't want to send people out and see them, their life go up in flames, in a sense. That's
exactly.
not our desire. And that's not what it's what Satan wants. It's not what we want. So we need to steward this whole situation well. So thank you for helping us and exploring this topic with us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, what a privilege.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting us.
So, Steve, that interview with Jim and Sam, what were some takeaways for you?
Well, I enjoyed listening to them. I enjoyed getting their perspective on places that I have never lived, or actually probably most of them never even traveled in those. But just to hear some of the day-to-day. I appreciated when they said understanding the theology of the grind, just the day by day by day. Because certainly there are a lot of exciting moments, but there are a lot of days where it's just you get up, you learn, you've done your shopping, you've got language, you're going to meet people, it's hot outside. There's just days where it's just, you're just living life.
It's just perseverance.
Just persevering.
There's no glory to it.
Right. It's just you're persevering. And anyway, I just thought that was an interesting expression, theology of the grind.
Yes.
And you?
Yeah, so I was really encouraged to think about that whole concept that the external hardness of a place isn't the only thing that's hard.
Yeah.
It's the internal world that gets stirred up, and how are you prepared for that external and how it's going to affect your internal world. And whether it's besetting sins or if it's just things, unresolved relationship, conflict, things like that, it's all going to become, when he talked about the miracle grow on all those things, I'm like, yeah, that's a very accurate depiction. So I think it's wise for us to be working with people on those things and not avoiding it.
Yeah. As much as we would love to be immediately sanctified when we show up in a new location, it's never happened yet.
Yes. Only Jesus, right?
Only Jesus. Well, this is Steve.
And this is Cara. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, or maybe the podcast you heard today, you've been prompted to pass this along to someone you know that could benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy lives to help us learn more about missionary care.
We want to thank Tim Downing for the music he wrote and performed for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can find out more about Tim at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos, and our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Githens, my amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website to see more of Micah's great work at sanctuaryinn.org.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.